Good to see you all. Should I just start name calling people? There's my favorite thing that like preschool teachers are amazing at is not raising their voice. They actually drop their voice, and they do that thing where they go like,
That's tough.
"Aaron is ready, Sherry is ready, Randy is ready," and all of a sudden the room goes silent. Whereas adults, I feel like our inclination is to start raising our voices, right? So the other cool church move is you just start praying, and then everyone stops talking, right? But sometimes actually that doesn't work, which is, maybe we should interrogate that, right? When that doesn't work, when the church keeps on talking while we're praying. Okay, so good to see you, Matt. Come on in. Yay, come on in. This is going to be an amazing conversation. Hi, Chris. Hi, Tim. We see you. We're glad you're here. Grant, so glad you're here. All right, I basically saw Dr. Keltner from across the front porch and was able to clock him immediately because I feel like I've been staring at this picture for a better part of the past few months. And I was just telling him that his voice has also been the voice in my ear, as not only I've been reading through this, but I've been listening to his podcasts that he has been a guest on, and hearing all of your, dare I say, exegesis of this particular text. No pressure, I told him that we have been pairing his words right alongside the words of the prophet Isaiah. And he was like, why Isaiah? And so that's something that we can also get into in our conversation. One of Dr. Keltner's former students is actually with us, and I invited her to do the bio. And I actually sourced your website, a bunch of other websites for a good bio. My favorite thing is to introduce people. I like bragging about people while they're there to other people. It's like a weird thing that I like to do. And I actually found the one in your book to be the most helpful. So as I've mentioned, and I've introduced him every single week now, again, no pressure, that Dr. Keltner is a professor of psychology right over here at UC Berkeley and the director of the Greater Good Science Center. But he's also, and I know I'm repeating stuff, but I also, because he's here, we have to be like, he's, excited about how cool it is that he's here. He's an expert on emotion. Like, he consulted for Inside Out and Inside Out 2, which is a movie that, I know, start clapping for that, which as a parent has revolutionized the way I talk to my children about their emotion. But let's be honest, it's revolutionized the way I see my own emotion. I can now put words to things that I just have either kept inhibited or misunderstood in myself. And so Dr. Keltner studies compassion and awe, how we express emotion and how emotions guide our moral identities and search for meaning. His research interests also span issues of power and status, inequality, and social class. Now, we all have purchased this book. Amazon has definitely sent multiple copies of this book to my office as well. But if you love the work that Dr. Keltner is doing and want to learn more, he's also authored The Power Paradox, How We Gain and Lose Influence, as well as Born to Be Good, The Science of a Meaningful Life. And I feel like other books that I keep opening, like I was reading your colleague's book, The Anxious Generation, and I've seen a lot of your research now just pop up. Probably helps that the algorithm is now feeding me, my search algorithm is feeding me everything Dacher Keltner. But on behalf of all of us here at First Pres Berkeley, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Charlene.
Mark, you already have a question? Yeah. Oh, yes. Sorry. Can you share the name of your
Science of Happiness. Yeah. And we've got a big audience, and we'd love you to join.
Yes, join the
really
audience.
Cool. So.
But if you just Google Dr. Keltner has been a guest on so many. So one of the ones that I actually was listening to recently was when you were a guest on Krista Tippett's On Being. And in it, so let's just start here. You share a funny story about how you're not a religious person, and your early experience living in Southern California, right? And in that exchange. So can you share with us your relationship with Jesus?
Oh, we're going to start there?
Yeah, let's just jump right in.
Yeah, so I am a child of the counterculture, and truly, in the deepest of ways, not just the take drugs ways. And I was born in Mexico, 1961. My parents were on the road, and my mom was the primary breadwinner and got her PhD at UCLA, and very progressive place. And then I was raised as a kid, first in Mexico and then Laurel Canyon in the late 60s. Or for those of you who know your cultural history, that was a very wild place. Lots of rock and roll, Joni Mitchell and the like. And my parents raised me spiritually to be really open to spirituality. I am forever grateful that, as a teenager, they gave me Lao Tzu, Tao Te Ching, and lots of Buddhism, Carl Jung, and collective unconscious and oceanic feelings and the like. But we didn't go to church, which was probably the beginning of a big trend culturally.
Mm-hmm.
I was one of those kids. My parents were just like, nope, it's patriarchal, et cetera. And you're...
it is patriarchal, but yes.
It is, yeah, no doubt. And so I went to this school that was primarily Jewish, and the holy days hit, and my class emptied, as did my brother Rolf's, whom you read about. And there were just a couple of non-Jews in the classroom, and my brother was in second grade or first grade, and he went up to the teacher, he's like, hey man, how come I'm here and all my friends are not here? And the teacher was like, well, those people are Jewish, those kids are Jewish, and you believe in Jesus, and you're not Jewish. And so he goes home, and he's like, Mom, who's this Jesus guy, man? He's making me go to school and do more homework. And my mom's like, oh, that's an oversight. And I wish I would have had more Christianity early. I learned it, socio-politically, the Gnostic Gospels, Elaine Pagel's, alternative Christianities, that was popular in the late 60s, 70s, and then through art and literature and the like. And it's interesting, I'll just end here. I was on a backpacking trip with my older daughter, Natalie, who took that photo, and she was like, Dad, she was really mad at me, and it's a lesson for all of you, and she's like, you should have given me more spirituality. And she was about 20, 22. It's like, well, here we are out in nature. 40% of Americans find the divine in nature. I'm open to it. And I think that's a hunger that a lot of us feel, that we want more spirit, we want more openness and mystery, like you said, Charlene. And it took me a while. So that's my early relationship to Jesus. And then I took a class in college on religion, and it was like, Jesus the communist. I'm like, cool, I'll read that. So, it's always changing.
Well, and I think that is something that we all yearn for and desire as well.
Yeah.
Again, today it was a bit on the nose. We talked about spirituality in religion as a source of wonder within the church, and actually how the church can often be an inhibitor of the awe that comes from spirit and religion, the rigidity that often can happen in this space. Multiple people I've seen already come up to you and say, oh my gosh, this is where we're seeing awe. And so let me tell you something a bit about this community. When you give them an assignment or homework, they will do it.
Yeah.
And so pretty early on in the journey, one of the biggest questions was, I want to experience awe. Of course I want to experience awe, but there's just so many distractions, and I don't know how to make space in my, okay, fine, you've given me, I know that there's a list, and a genuine anxiety over being openness to awe.
Yeah.
And so we've named some of that distraction.
Yeah.
And but can you just kind of, if society were to have an awe problem, what is in and around our ability to kind of open ourselves up to spirituality, to the vastness?
Yeah, I feel like it's telling to me in our research in 26 different countries that Laura is now working on. No one mentioned technology as a source of awe. It is in the abstract, and algorithms are interesting and so forth, but it just isn't it. And I think it's telling because to the problems of finding awe are many in our world, even though people are finding awe in more ways today and in richer forms than I think at any time in human history. A young person today can go to their smartphone and hear Sona Jobarte from Gambia and her music and be transported. So that's incredible. Or hear, your views of Christianity. So, but I think that socially and culturally, what I learned, and it really was in grief in some sense, which is you have to pause. We're way overscheduled. You really largely have to be with other people. You can find awe very powerfully on your own, nature and so forth, but, look for it with other people, be aware of it. Both of those basic tendencies of pausing and reflecting are cultivated by spiritual traditions, and they're being conspired against by our contemporary life. Young people today are just constantly overscheduled and isolated. And then I think that, the other, two other conceptual orientations towards awe that our world conspires against are mystery. That word kept coming to me as I wrote this book, like, it's all mysterious. It's endlessly mysterious. Charles Darwin, as he figured out his theory of evolution, just everything was mysterious ultimately. Yeah. God is mysterious, moral beauty is mysterious. Our relationship to the divine is always full of puzzles, and how wonderful our minds are that we embrace mystery. And a lot of our world works against mystery today. And then to look to systems. And I know it's an abstract idea. Fritjof Capra, who's a Berkeley guy, Tao of Physics, has a wonderful book on systems. Once you get out of the hyper-analytic mode of smartphones and algorithms and our contemporary life, and you're just like, what's the big thing that I am in relation to right now? And the minute you take that view, awe becomes more possible, right? And when I was grieving my brother and really knocked off the rails, it was like, pause, always, think about mysteries, think about the big things that I'm part of here, and it came more readily, the everyday awe of the book.
A direct quote from your book that is at top of mind for me is that we are impatient with the unexplained.
Yeah.
And so how do you, so when there is a mystery, I have found now that if I don't know something, I immediately grab my phone and Google it.
Yeah.
It's like we used to do that thing where it's like, oh, do you remember when we didn't have cell phones and you would have to meet somebody at the mall? Like, what did you do? Do you remember when you had a question about a certain topic and you have to go to an encyclopedia? Like, how horrifying, right?
Yeah.
So the time between unknowing, mystery, and knowing, conquest, is very truncated now.
Well put.
So how do you either suggest or practice for yourself the embracing of mystery versus the explaining?
Yeah, what a terrific observation. And I think that our conversation around digital technologies, John Haidt's book on anxiety, kind of misses some of the bigger issues at play. It's really disrupted all of our social life.
Yeah.
We don't listen to music together anymore. That's astounding to me.
Yeah.
That's why we evolved music in the first place, hundreds of thousands of years ago. And like you're saying, Charlene, we have lost, and young people, I am around thousands of 18-year-olds all the time. And so I see the next generation, and they want answers right away. They don't embrace mystery. They don't meander and they don't wonder because of the digital saturation. Just a little funny story on that, Google Maps. I went to Amsterdam because I have a bunch of collaborators there, and I was in one part of the city, and when I was 20, I used to wander through cities and discover all kinds of stuff like you probably did, and land where I was supposed to be, my own map of the place. And I was like, okay, get to the University of Amsterdam. The fastest way, the most efficient way, was straight through all the drugs and pornography of Amsterdam. And I was like, God, I hate Amsterdam, And that's, because it had no sense of imagination. It's like fast efficiency. And so what I do, and our Awe Walk study was designed to do that. Like, every time you do something in a day, give yourself a little moment where you're off track. Where you're just like, I know I have to walk to that store. I'm going to walk over that way and see what happens. We did that in the study. Help people 75 years old or older. Go to places, let your mind move towards mystery and things you don't know, right? Okay, I'm on my walk through Berkeley or what have you, and I'm just going to look around and look for things I can't name or know. And now, like our lab is working with museums, for example, to cultivate that spirit again. Museums have been designed for efficient knowledge, but really what they should be designed for is what's mysterious about this painting you're looking at? What don't you understand, right? So again, build those into little moments of the day as a contemplative practice.
Are you all familiar with the Awe Walks that Dr. Keltner is talking about? Yep. Okay, so I see some heads nodding. 2 steps.
Yeah, let me hear it.
Gosh, I know I'm nervous. A childlike wonder, assuming a posture of childlike wonder, and then, obviously walks in nature, but hopefully seeing things that you haven't seen before, even if you have to discover something anew in familiar places. So I use that as an example. This past weekend, I went on an odd trip. But what's so interesting in his work around these Awe Walks is that he has the participants take a selfie in the beginning of the process and then afterwards. And so we've talked about how awe is transformational. Like, it's not just something you feel and then you're like done with it. It changes us. It makes us more open. It makes us see connections and intricacies in our lives together and systems. And so you see this in the picture. The first picture, like the woman's face is much more prominent. It pretty much is, like, I would say 80% of the selfie. And then after several rotations of doing this Awe Walk, you find that the selfie, her face becomes smaller. She is now trying to, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, capture more of the world that she is in. And so can you just tell us, that was, like, to me, a very striking thing to see. Can you tell us a bit more about the transformations that you have witnessed as a result of awe?
Yeah, and what a wonderful description. Thank you for that. And thanks for attending to our measures so carefully. When you read the spiritual journaling of Julian of Norwich and, the Bhagavad Gita and, the Buddha, and there's this sense of kind of merging with things that are larger than you, divine forces or ecosystems or pieces of music. Probably many people in this room have felt like suddenly my thoughts are part of this piece of music, right, which is a transcendent thing. And our lab has done a good job of capturing that merging with things that are larger than you. Jane Goodall beautifully said that's really the heart of spirituality in some sense, is to get out of the ego and the self and merge with things that are larger than us. It's a remarkable shift evolutionarily, by the way. But so what we've documented is, first of all, like you said, in moments of awe, you feel like you're part of a network, you're part of an ecosystem, you're part of all life forms, as would feel intuitive. In moments of awe, as you merge with larger things, the daily anxieties just diminish. As you merge with things larger than the self, if you're vulnerable to depression, that quiets down, right? As you merge with things larger than yourself in moments of awe, your body really changes. And, my lab does a lot of work on psychophysiology. The early discoveries were really cortisol and the amygdala and stress and fight or flight physiology. Oh, that's it to human physiology. But we've started to find, as you merge with awe, oxytocin is released, the neuropeptide of connection. You get elevated vagus nerve activation, the big bundle of nerves in your chest that give you that warm opening and tears in your eyes, as I saw with you when you thought about why you have the career that you have, and old regions of the brain. So it just starts to tell us that, you really become open to the big forces of the universe. Walt Whitman said, when he's trying to capture it, he's like, you dilate. You just kind of open up to all things around you. And we need that. We need that today. Young people, it is the tyranny of the self, and we've been griping about it for 40 years. And awe is the pathway out of that.
Okay, this is a little bit of it's a related tangent.
Yeah.
So I feel this. I feel the efficiency. I feel the default self becoming just so even more intense than it already is just in our human nature, right?
Yeah.
How did we get here?
Yeah. Yeah. What we are in a crisis. A lot of the data that I teach undergrad, climate crises, authoritarian crises, the polarization crisis is really largely driven by our dislike of people who are different from us. It's not that we love our group more. A lot of data show it's that we dislike Elon Musk, and whatever it is, and et cetera. And then a crisis of loneliness where we've become fractionated and polarized. And what I love about awe is, like you said, Charlene, like the transformation doesn't need a restructuring of society. We don't need to change tax policy that would shift, levels of poverty we know in the United States, which are high. Awe is a way to get out of these crises, and a lot of the data in the book speak to that. How we get there, how we got here is, the United States is the most individualistic culture in human history. There's no comparison in human history. It's been in operation for 50 years. As a big value shift. A lot of it is great, right? Civil rights, women's rights, sex rights, freedom, self-expression, new music, new art, protest the war. Berkeley is an epicenter of this, right? And there's a lot of upsides to it, but the downsides are we've lost a sense of collective in myriad ways, and it's why it's so nice to see these pews full. And that, that manifests in the number of picnics people engage in is down by half. People listen to music by themselves. They are spending too much time on themselves. You could go on, and we think spiritual wisdom is found in here, right? And we forget it's the collective. And so I think the next generation, the Lauras of the world, know this. They're frustrated with our generation, and they're going to get back to it, but it's going to take a lot of work.
Okay, 1 second, Mark. I'm going to ask a few more questions, and I promise. I know I always promise, and I don't keep my promise. I'm going to really try to endeavor to keep this promise, but I just want to follow up on that. It is fascinating. So much of the stuff I'm thinking about and reading about is from the lens of the rise of the religiously unaffiliated.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And yet, this really intense desire for spiritual, like what your daughter was saying, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not that it's going away, we're just putting it in a different pocket or different places. We're experiencing it in nature. We're rejecting other things, accepting other things. It's this constant push and pull. And so, I don't know, like what wisdom do you have for communities as we endeavor to do this awe thing, like you said, how it's supposed to be done together?
Yeah.
Because it's complicated.
It is. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
That's your job, not mine.
Yeah.
So I have to fight the stuff on campus. But it is complicated. But and it's irrepressible. It is and it's so fascinating. When you read the book, I am a evolutionist. I didn't get a lot of religious training, although I've read a lot, and I've become open to spirituality, and it's been so interesting to teach at Berkeley. I didn't used to teach spirituality, and then I moved it into my happiness class, and now I'm like, you guys should be open to it. Just think about it. Feel it. See what's in you. 81% of Americans believe in the divine, Half of them, it's out in nature. And so, what struck me writing this book, and in many conversations, like I've been to synagogues and talked with Mormon churches and with you. I mean, religious organizations have been very interested in this for obvious reasons. I think you got it right, Charlene. And I think there's a lesson for you in this community that Malcolm Clemens Young is embracing over Grace Cathedral. We're talking about the de-churching of the West, but it's different than that. Nicholas Kristof wrote about that. It really is, people are finding spirit in more places right now. There are 38 million practitioners of yoga in the United States. When I started yoga as a 17-year-old at UC Santa Barbara, there was none. And the guy came in a white outfit, looked like Jesus, and I was like, they were like, oh, you go to yoga? Is that a cult? Now it's everywhere, right? Psychedelics is at 30 to 50%. So we are seeking spirit, and my advice for you is to bring those things into here.
Okay.
Right? And Malcolm Clemens Young, who I interviewed for the book, who I revere and admire, much like you, he's bringing Grace Cathedral, he's bringing art into it, transcendent music, chanting, yoga, political discussions, etc. Make it a commons of spirit, and knowing half of Americans find spirit really in nature. First, how many of you feel that way? That nature is there you go, right? So, we should be doing this in gardens, and it's an important lesson for your career.
It might be Grace Cathedral that one of the innovative things they're doing is just creating a no digital space. So they'll open up their sanctuary, and you have to check. You can check, not have to. And people are just like, yay, an opportunity to check my phone and my device at the door. In our strategic planning work, hi Dot, I see you. In our strategic planning work, one of the fascinating things that came out was how the church needs to be more open to people coming through the back door of church. And so we're talking about street meal, we're talking about the mobile food service, but also our jazz night. So we had a jazz night here,
nice,
where one of our neighbors who grew up Catholic came in and she said, "You guys can dance at church?" I'm like, "Yeah, we can dance at church."
No,
I mean, there was no it was just this amazing jazz quartet, and we just danced and danced. And so, thank you. I feel like, okay, because Dr. Keltner said it, we should just keep on doing it. All right, Mark, what's your question? Okay. Can you say it really loud?
Yeah.
And I started thinking, why are people interested in Halloween, particularly adults?
Yeah.
Candy and everything like that, but I mean, it's been this tradition for so long. I'm not even sure where it, started, but I could find that. But I'm just wondering, because I got the sense, on one hand, that, as you say in one place, awe feels intrinsically good.
I challenge you to interview all the grammar school kids the day after Halloween.
I'm talking about adults.
Yeah.
All right, and maybe we just do it for the kids.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, that most moments of awe, about 3/4 feel good. Only a quarter are flavored with regret. So, is Halloween awe?
Yeah, totally.
Or is that something else? Okay.
How many of you have felt awe at Halloween? Yeah, it's a
Collective effervescence.
Yeah, collective effervescence, lots of costumes, etc. Yeah, but more deeply, and I think it speaks to our cultural moment. I can't quite remember precisely the cultural history of Halloween, but it comes out of a very common tradition around the world of honoring the death. Yeah, exactly. The Day of the Dead ceremonies of Mesoamerica, which are highly developed Tibetan burial rituals. In Japan, they have days of ancestor visits where you sense the ancestors. And death, as I learned first with my brother's passing, and then in studying sort of recognitions of the life cycle, is awesome. It's the ultimate mystery in many ways for the biological mind, the spiritual mind. It's the provenance of all kinds of spiritual ritual and practice and belief. And part of Halloween and Day of the Dead is to become part of that part of the life cycle. We don't understand that now. So obviously, this is prosaic. It's a very Berkeley thing to say. A lot of the great rituals become commodified and capitalized and monetized. But I suspect if you went to a Day of the Dead ritual in Oaxaca, Mexico, and really were there, it would be raw awe. It'd be right there. And that's what it's part of, is this coming to terms with the end of life and all that is associated with. So I hear you. I have trouble. I didn't like horror movies as a kid. These rituals, Halloween wasn't my favorite thing. But I think at the core, it is about what happens at the other side of the life cycle that we ignore in this culture.
Which I think most people find
Fearsome.
Yeah. Whereas in other cultures, they don't, right? And so we need to learn from other places.
And you are so generous with your story, and particularly around Rolf's death. That felt like a real gift. Thank you for writing with such honesty in your book. You gave a part of yourself to all of us. And I mean, for every person in this room who has experienced the loss of a loved one, thank you for sharing that with us. You initially talk about how Paul Ekman, you were looking out over the bay, and who I imagine was a great teacher or mentor for you. Paul Ekman mentions like study awe.
Yeah.
Did it kind of go by the wayside? And then Rolf, like how did that end up becoming something that you would dedicate so much of your time and energy to?
Yeah, thank you for that. Paul Ekman is a very important person, had a deep connection, as did his wife Marianne Mason, to Berkeley. It's amazing to me, and once you're in a field for 30 years, as I have been studying human emotion, and I think that it's reflective of the biases of science and then the biases of this culture, which is we were stuck in the Freudian view of the mind when I started, and the selfish gene view of the mind when I started in the early 1990s of we're gratification machines, it's fight or flight and reproduction, and that's all that the mind is designed to do. And everything else is not real in the evolutionary sense. And the field of emotion largely studied fear and anger and shame and sadness and disgust, which is what I had done. And I think the first catalyst of the science of awe for me was when my first daughter was born, Natalie. And I was raised as a child of awe. I'm very grateful. Today, worldwide, parents, if you ask them 11 things that you should teach a child, they rank the imagination last. I'm just like, that's one of the great mistakes of history, right? Manners is number one. I'm like, oh my God. And you can imagine what my manners were like as a long-haired hippie kid. But,
so you're telling me I can give that up?
What?
So you're telling me I can just give that up with
give
my
it
kids?
up.
Okay.
Yeah. So I loved awe. Got a lot of art and literature as a kid. D.H. Lawrence, thank you, Don, for the reminder, and so forth. But then, 1997, Natalie was born, and I write about it in the book. Just like ripped me wide open. The world was new. And so I had to study this emotion with all the tools. And I was at Berkeley, and a Berkeley professor who usually has long hair could get away with studying awe. And I thought, a lot of people kind of chuckled and laughed, and But I fought it. That's why you read a lot of neurophysiology and genetics and so forth to fight that fight. And then the book, what happened to me was two things. You know, one is like awe, ultimately, and like spirituality, like you and I were talking, it's always shape-shifting and moving and transforming. It is always changing and mysterious. And science, as William James realized, can't get to the essence of the thing. And so I started to feel, as I was writing this book, like, I got to do something else, right? And then my brother gets sick. And, you know, when you watch someone, my brother graduated from Berkeley, very big guy, very strong. Colon cancer is combat. It is brutal. He weighed 140 pounds, just like, you know. And then he goes, and I have these big awe experiences. And I was like, the first person lived narrative that is not what scientists do. I do central tendencies and statistics and so forth. But William James had the same insight, like, it's got to be stories of people's experience. And I'd always been skeptical of that, because I was raised by two people that's all they had. And I was like, I like math, up yours, you know, whatever it is. You're wrong, Dad, you know. And I was like, it is first person, and it's my person. You know, it's my lived experience. And I am very gratified, and thank you for saying that, you know. I've gotten involved in a lot of palliative care, thanks to this book, you know, of designing programs, and because they're like, there's a Mass General, very pioneering palliative care doctors who are like, they're dealing with parents who lose their children. And they're like, there is tons of awe in all of it. And so how do we, to your question, we don't do that well in the West. You know, we give people pills and procedures, and hospitals are sterile. So how do we surface wonders? And they're going to do good work. So it was worth it.
Thank you. Santa.
Yeah, the awe of the universe is pretty universal.
Yeah.
But I think when the religious awe
Yeah.
that I have experienced
Yeah.
in an internal, actual relationship with God, that
Yeah.
person talking to me and letting me know
Yeah.
that I'm seen, that God is with me. Now, I think most non-religious people do not have that experience.
Yeah.
And I think it's because, why would you be open to that? It's silly, it's crazy. You look like a crazy person. And, you know, but so I just took a class, beginning ukulele, there was like 10 people in the class. Besides me, no one in there was open
Yeah.
to any other person there. They brought their ukulele, you know, I was the only one around saying, oh, that's a cute one, where'd you get that? And nobody trusted or wanted to connect.
Yeah.
And I think that
Yeah.
applies, because, you know, God says, love God and love your neighbor like yourself.
Yeah.
It's essential.
I agree.
It's not optional. For these people, love was not happening.
Yeah.
Not hate, but not love.
Yeah.
You know, and,
Do you have a question, Santa?
well, just, not really, but
But I think it's a,
Fair enough.
where's the awe of God speaking
yeah.
and the Holy Spirit in you? Now, if you're not open to it, my point is you're not making the conversation,
Right.
then it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I like, you know, I think there's a point you're making, you know, the crisis of individualism oriented attention inward to the mind, coming out of the Age of Enlightenment, et cetera. A lot of progress, but we've lost relationality. And that's, to me, be it some conception of God, you know, as the scientist who might study this, or indigenous traditions, nature, right? It's just life, biological life is divine, and connecting to them, and they feel, and it's so fascinating to read indigenous perspectives on this. They don't feel separate from it. They don't paint it or own it or treat it as a resource or study it like I would. It's like, no, they relate to it. and that's part of the crisis of individualism that I think your comment speaks
It's
to.
for consumption.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the lack of imagination that you brought up too, like people are afraid that imagination is just false, it's fiction.
Yeah,
Whereas it is a way to access things that are not so obvious.
yeah.
Other questions? Yes, James. I'm going to give you a mic so you don't have to yell. Because I love you.
I was born in Africa, and I'm just thinking the concept of being, contemplating and meditating and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people in that culture when I was growing up is subsistence existence.
Yeah.
You don't have time to worry about. You're trying to figure out how to make it to get food on the table and farm. Maybe the rains will come. If the cow would stay alive, things like that. So in that kind of situation, I don't feel like, I feel like maybe you need some kind of leisure or to be able to do this. So what has been your experience in meeting with, say, indigenous societies and tribal societies in that? I've probably made a transition from that myself because I no longer live there. I've been almost like 50 years away from that,
Yeah.
but I can imagine that. Like even when I was 5 years old, I had a job. I was looking at my grandmother's herd of little sheep, and the only time leisure I had, because I had to keep them from wandering into the field and destroying the crops, is maybe I have a time to maybe look down and see some ants and try to figure out how they're building their society and all that. So there's not much leisure. So
Yeah.
I don't know how you handle that.
Yeah, I was really worried about that too. I would pull apart leisure from awe. In fact, I think one of the problems of our society is we've conceptualized many kinds of activities as leisure, not something deeper like awe. So a couple of responses. One of the worries I had studying awe is it just an emotion for the privileged? Of going to symphonies and art museums, and which we know are very privileged experiences, regrettably in the West, and it's not. There's a nice paper, Paul Piff, nationally representative sample in the United States. The poorer you are, the more you experience regular awe. So something about privilege gets in the way, which we've partially been talking about. And then, you should invite Dr. Yuria Solidwin she has a book called Flourishing Kin coming out in November. She's at the UN doing research, has done work with more indigenous societies than probably any scholar in the world. And in her telling, in her scholarship, awe is much more present in indigenous societies. And it really is a question of how have we lost it in our development, our so-called development. It's part of the rituals, it's part of the relationship to nature, the relationship to the sky, it's part of music, it's part of food, it permeates. And she calls it this ethics of belonging, of I belong to nature, and we're all related. All life forms are connected. And I would say individualism has assaulted those two core beliefs, and that's part of the crisis today. So I was worried about that. The data and different kinds of scholarship lead me to the opposite conclusion, that we need to learn, this Western world needs to learn a lot from elsewhere.
So you had talked about, I'm seeing so many hands, oh gosh. You had used the example of being at San Quentin.
Yeah.
To talk about how awe is not limited to the privileged or the wealthy.
Yep.
Which leads me to think that if anything, an inhibitor is entitlement.
Yes. Yep.
Gosh. Oh, how do you, which is just like part and parcel with individualism.
Yeah.
So we actually have so much to learn from cultures that don't feel like something is owed to them. They it's what we owe to each other, right?
Yeah.
How do you break down that, honestly, I'm going to call it a sin of entitlement?
Yeah.
Just being with each other?
Yeah, I mean, it is, anyway, when I look at, I did research on economic inequality and social class and privilege and, the 1% in the United States, and it's entitled, and they don't feel as much awe and it gets in the way of that experience. So I think you're right. I don't know, I wouldn't, I would call it, but I think it's worth calling it a sin. Most of the spiritual traditions, a lot of them have some core, as one of you said, fundamental common agape humanity, which countervails the sense of difference. And I think it's one of the challenges of our times, that how do we cultivate the sense that things are given to us, that they're worthy of reverence, that maybe we should deprioritize anyway, consumption, that we're not entitled to it, and that the gifts that young people have are remarkable today, and a lot of people feel that we've lost that, and it's going to be a real struggle how we countervail it. And I think that that's one of the things that religion helps us with, is to remember.
Hopefully.
Like Jesus is. I was talking to Charlene. You should look at Poussin's paintings of the 7 sacraments of Jesus, and I was looking at them in Edinburgh for a talk, and it's all reverence and gift, and just like he's just giving and giving and revering the prostitute and education and spaces, and I was like, wow, that's the antidote to entitlement.
Amen. Like that religious word there. Tim, go ahead. You want to be loud, or you want to use the mic? Okay. Okay, I just want to see everyone raise your hand who has a question, because we're not going to get to all of them. Okay, good to know. We're not going to get to all of them, just managing expectations. Go ahead, Tim.
I really appreciate your emphasis on mystery.
Yeah.
I want to ask a question about the relationship between love and mystery. And so I wouldn't have done this except you mentioned Julian of Norwich. So
Yeah.
I'm going to read a short quote
Nice.
from another mystic, St. John of the Cross. And this will maybe tease up the question on love and its relationship to mystery. For God can well be loved, but God cannot be thought. By love, God can be grasped and held, but by thought, neither grasped nor held. So my question again is, because I haven't heard us talking too much about love just yet,
Yeah.
but we can't know God, we can love God.
Yeah.
And so where does love show up with mystery?
Yeah. What a great question, and thank you for the quote. My lab, I take a different evolutionary neuroscientific perspective, and there are a lot of emotions that protect the self and make sure we eat food and have friendships and rise in the ranks and so forth. And then there's this class of emotions that Charlene referred to that I've been studying for 20 years, which we call self-transcendent states. And they include gratitude, which you've mentioned or alluded to, awe, bliss, which is a very ecstasy, compassion, which I studied for a long time, and love, the devotion to something other than the self. And we've done good work on that. And I love your observation that all of these states, and one of the engines of them is mystery, that you never understand. The rational mind will never put it into an equation or algorithm that I always gravitate to, that it's always changing and ineffable and so forth, and mysterious. And I believe that's one of the magics of these self-transcendent states, is you can't boil them down to an equation. And it's interesting, that quote echoes a deep vein that we only know through love and not thought. is a very important. It's Lao Tzu, Tao Te Ching, it's the mystics, it's David Hume in Western philosophy who influenced Charles Darwin. Like, our basic way of knowing the world is through inexplicable feeling, and that tells us something important here, which is, like Emerson and James, like, we need to find our feelings. Young people need to find those spiritual feelings. So it's a great quote, very illustrative.
I opened the sermon saying that we've been feeling all the feels this series with okay. I'm just going to do it. 3 questions, because I've seen the 3 of you with your hands raised. So Len, sir, what was your name? Yeah. Martin. So Len, Martin, and then Jackie.
Okay,
Can you do
thank
3
you.
questions?
Sure.
Please use the mic and get to it.
Is it on? It's on.
Go ahead, Len, yeah.
Okay.
I hear you.
First of all, good. First of all, I want to thank you for this wonderful book. It's been a revelation for me
Aw.
as a scientist to deal with these kinds of feelings. And I'm starting to. Sorry.
And I am too.
Anyway, so I do have a question, though. I'm just wondering, you say you weren't raised in a particularly religious situation, but you no doubt have studied many religions, and you are aware of the Beatitudes of Jesus. And would you comment on the relationship of awe to what Jesus was preaching at that time?
Great question.
Yeah, I mean, what I do is I've been studying religion informally since I was 16, even though I didn't have any background in it. And to me, like in my experience with the 7 sacraments and just looking at those paintings, I don't know enough about the Beatitudes. Like, wow, here's a person who is consecrating a prostitute. That's just transcendent. Think about our world today, 700,000 unhoused. That just is the starting point. And so I think that and then the idea of miracle and mystery that runs throughout is like, hey, your rational mind is so limited. I was just in a panel with Jim Garrison. UFOs are real. The government's releasing data. The best science says they're there. So be open. So to me, and I teach Karen Armstrong in my classes now. Like, if you look at her, the Great Transformation, Christianity is prominent in that.
Yep.
In that hostile time of the axial age 2,500 years ago, all these traditions were like, how do we love people? How do we feel the common spirit? How do we sacrifice? How do we know other minds? And it is a pathway to self-transcendence and the bliss that comes with it. So to me, he's one of the great authors of that view. And you're lucky to have him in your life.
Len, thank you for the question. All right, Martin and then Jackie.
All right. Before I answer my question, thank you for introducing me to awe. I've never heard about it before until, I guess,
Today.
Well, it was today and one other day. But anyhow, thank you. But so my question is, is there a difference between awe and wow?
And wow.
Yes.
If you read the book, what we do in the field of emotions are hard to define. There are these complicated phenomena, but there are many layers to an emotional experience. And one of them is the wow. So I'm going to count to 3, and everybody give me their best sound of awe. 1, 2, 3.
Whoa.
Isn't that nice? So wow is in that space, and we've done a lot of sophisticated research around the world in remote. If I took every one of your sounds, as we did, and played them in remote Bhutan, they'd be like, whoa, that person's feeling like they're around something mysterious and vast. So it's part of our vocalization of awe.
The whoa, the chills, the tears.
And then what gets really interesting, and there are musicologists who are like, hey, those sounds kind of sound like chanting and choral music. Why is that? I was in Japan and I heard these Buddhist monks, like, whoa, you know, and I was like, and the idea being spiritual, religious practice together, singing together brings you the feeling through these ancient mechanisms.
Wow, that was some good chanting there.
Yeah,
You can
thank
come
you.
back and just do that. All right, Jackie.
Hi, I'm curious about your work with palliative care.
Yeah,
It seems like death and dying is the great equalizer.
yeah.
And I imagine that there are findings or maybe an intervention that you could share with us, or maybe you could just tell us more
Yeah.
about your work and how that can point us toward awe, and there can be an opening there, I imagine.
Yeah, you know, the fellow at UC San Francisco who has the high-profile palliative care program, whose name I'm blanking on, is building awe, you know, very straight out of the book into it. The people I've worked with, Mass General, Kaiser Permanente, they're doing exactly what Charlene did, which is they're saying, here's a mystery and a wonder, which is the end of life, even when you watch your child head into the end of life. And it's horrible and painful and anxiety producing, of course. But there are mysteries and wonders there. And what they're doing, and I love this, and we've built out, if you're interested, I've got awe cards that we're working on in the lab.
Yes.
You know, take those 8 wonders and use them as frames for conversations and practices for people in the palliative moment. So with the children at Mass General, it's like, have the child think about what's a story of moral beauty right now for them, who just, because they're feeling pain, and, you know, think about moments of nature, listen to music for some kind of deeper meaning to it. And it's not top down, it's more emergent, right? Give them the frame, give them the concepts, and then the conversations emerge. And then likewise for the caregivers, right? They need it profoundly. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Okay, friends, I am so sorry. I want to honor Dr. Keltner's time because we know that we could just stay here for hours and hours and ask him questions. And I also wanted to leave some time to sign some of your books for those of you who brought it. I think I can speak for all of us in saying that we are glad that you exist in this world.
Thank you.
The work that you are doing, continue to do, have done, it is transforming our community individually and collectively. The stories that are coming and being brought to the surface using the language and the concepts that you're giving us has been such a gift. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlene.
All right, I know there's some of you with youth who need to pick up your kids from youth group. Go do that. Can you get mine as well, actually? And I'm going to set up a little table, and we're going to do some quick signing. I know you're going to want to stop and have a 10-minute conversation with Dr. Keltner when you get your book signed. Please don't do that, because we also just want to give him his afternoon as well. So we'll get that set up. Thank you all for coming and being here.